next, I'm going to call to the stage Dr. Chanuki Seresinhe. I hope I got that more or less right, who has been doing some very interesting work on one hand at Boon, which is a new company where Chanuki is the Chief Tech and Data Officer, and a project which is quite different from that, which my artist friend pointed me to, which is something called beautifulplaces.ai. And so what the core of the work Chanuki is doing at Boon is to do with understanding human psychology in order to better predict the shifts that we're going to see in society to help private companies deal with problems that they've found particularly important for their industry. And also to start slowly, I think, get towards a stage where we're building AI that's truly complementary to humans and can work with them. So a big round of applause for Chanuki.
Magic moment where I connect the slides. Yay. Great. Quite often in our lives, when we make key decisions, we tend to focus on what's above the surface. We tend to focus on the superficial and the obvious. Whether we're individuals, businesses, or governments, we tend to focus on the what, and we rarely focus on the why. Let's just take an example in the workplace. Say we're in a meeting and we have this one colleague who's always disagreeing with us. And what do? We want to just stop them from disagreeing with us. Take climate change. We see people that are obviously denying the effects of climate change. What do? We give them lots of facts. Of course that's going to change your mind, right? Let's take terrorism. When governments are trying to combat terrorism, they try to focus, of course, on stopping the acts of violence. But what if we could have stopped it a long time ago? What if we could have looked at why individuals are actually deciding to become terrorists? So we worry, as Boon, as a company, that we don't focus enough on the why. Now, Boon helps bridge this gap. We really believe that once you're focusing on understanding why people do what they do, not just on the what they are doing, you're better placed to anticipate what comes next. And this is how you can make informative and effective decisions. And it's impossible to do this without building this deep understanding. So let's go back to that example. We're in our workplace. What if we took the time to understand why our colleague is being so disagreeable? If we start analyzing why, or maybe even just talking to them, we might discover, actually, they're really insecure. They're incredibly threatened by our presence. They're really new to AI, and they're terrified of being left behind. And once we start talking to them, suddenly they're opening up to us. Suddenly they want to learn AI. Suddenly they're our ally. So we've turned something from animosity to allyship. And this isn't just this airy-fairy we want to resolve conflict in the workplace. This is about creating productive relationships that help the business go forward. So the reason we do this is not just for good reasons. I mean, good reasons are important, but because it also takes society forward as well. Let's take a more complex scenario. Let's take counterterrorism again. And think about what it would mean if governments start to really look at why individuals are becoming radicalized. We can then build more effective and proactive strategies. Maybe instead we might focus on what's happening on the ground. Maybe we would focus on solving economic disparities, social alienation, and really looking at the factors that lead individuals to radicalization. So there's a difference here. We're not going problem, crisis, reaction. We're going analysis, understanding, and strategic action. How do we do this at Boone? There's lots of factors that go into our models. One of them is psychometrics. It's a scientific study of psychological and cognitive attributes. So, who is this person? What are their core values? What are their cognitive abilities? How risk-seeking are they? We also look at social psychology, and this is a study of how people's thoughts, feelings, and decisions are influenced by their social environment. So how do people's attitudes shift in groups? What influences people's sense of identity? What social factors are actually influencing people's decisions? How do we do this? We use people's words. Words are powerful indicators of who we are as human beings, what we feel, and how we view the world. Words can be analyzed, I think everybody knows this here, to understand the why driving human behavior. So, we're putting this all together. We've got the words, and we're data agnostic. We choose the source where we think we're going to find the truth, depending on the problem that we're actually analyzing. So it could be social media, it could be podcasts, it could be forums and blogs, it could be news articles, it could be review sites, it could be interviews. It doesn't matter, it really depends on the problem. All of that gets analyzed, and a bunch of knowledge getting extracted, and then it goes to our psych engines and analyzed for various aspects of human behavior and group dynamics. And then we have the Boone platform, which is augmenting decision-making with true intelligence and clarity. And we use this in complex, high-impact scenarios. So I'm going to break down one aspect of what it means for us to have true intelligence. And again, it's what I talked about before. We're not looking at just what's on the surface. We want to really dig really deep to really understand human behavior. And one of these is actually really understanding people from different cultures. Now, my background is Sri Lankan. However, I've lived most of my life in the UK and the US. For the life of me, I cannot tell you what it's like to be a Sri Lankan that lives in Sri Lanka. Quite often, we think we understand other cultures, maybe because we have some kind of commonality, but honestly, we don't. And we shouldn't fool ourselves in order to do that. Luckily, technology can help us bridge these gaps. So, coming back to psychology, a model that a lot of psychometricians use is LINQ. It's linguistic inquiry and word count. And it's a dictionary-based model. It has hierarchical categories spanning broad linguistic features, so pronouns, verbs, and specific psychological constructs. It calculates the proportion of words in a text and matches each category. Researchers combine these scores, and they create different weights, and then they create more complex measures of psychological traits, cognitive styles, and social dynamics. And this is used really widely. So there's been over 20,000 research citations. So it's a commonly used model. However, if we look at the language coverage of LINQ, it's actually quite sparse. This is not that many languages. And worse, it's actually very hard if you're working in a global context and you want to use LINQ across several different languages. You can't. So what you have to do is actually translate the language into English, which is what most people do, and then use the one language, the English model, in order to understand human behavior. This is not great. We have a world of languages. There are over 7,000 spoken languages around the world. And what are we missing by only focusing on the most common languages? I came across this paper and I thought it was really interesting. It's talking about GPT, and turns out that GPT is an effective tool for multilingual psychological text analysis. So they evaluated just 3 versions of GPT, and then just straight out of the box, right? On the ability to detect sentiment, discrete emotions, so that's like anger, joy, or fear, offensiveness, things like insults and threats, and moral foundation, so care, quality, authority, loyalty, aspects like that. And they tested it across 12 languages. They used widely spoken languages, like English, Arabic, Indonesian, and Turkish, as well as lesser spoken languages. They chose lesser spoken languages from Africa. And it turns out that GPT, just out of the box, significantly outperformed traditional dictionary-based analysis methods. So this is incredible. This is incredibly promising. However, a word of caution, of course, these models are still overrepresenting English. And another thing that we need to worry about, because they're overrepresenting English, they've got encoded in it English-centric values, as well as the assumptions, the English-centric view of other languages, other cultures. And of course, it's internet source training data, so we need to be cautious that it might be reinforcing dominant views online. And we've seen that in talks that talk about harms and biases in AI. There's a paper, it's called Having Peer After Prayer. What was so interesting about this paper is they didn't just use GPT-4, they actually use JIS chat, and that's an Arabic LLM. They found even in the Arabic LLM when they were prompting it, so the joke with the beer is like, after a prayer, I'm going to friends to drink, and then you see even in the Arabic LLM, it says tequila. Of course that's not happening. So this is, this is how much the English language is so embedded in these LLM models. Even when you change it, it's still there. So it's taking some work. There's another paper, Are Multilingual LLMs Culturally Diverse Reasoners? And they were putting a lot of proverbs into LLMs to see if they can actually understand what they are. They performed okay with English and Chinese proverbs because those proverbs are widely known. However, when you start trying to understand it in lesser known languages, again, the LLM has no idea. And they tried to even translate to English and then see if the LLM would understand, but still, there's a culture gap. The LLMs are not getting it. So how do you get around it? Of course, we all know how you prompt your LLM makes a big difference. So this paper found that even just doing a very specific prompt, just saying, you're a typical human being, or I'm an average person, just that simple change already made the LLM function better. But this paper was really interesting because it was actually teaching the LLM how to think like an anthropologist. And it actually has this enormous prompt teaching the the LLM, think like an anthropologist, and suddenly it was actually, again, answering questions a lot better about people from different backgrounds and underrepresented backgrounds. So this is great, right? So we know that we can prompt LLMs better. So that's a start, but that's not the end-all, be-all. We still need methods of testing, how we might fine-tune LLMs, how we might develop new models to actually understand different cultures. I discovered Culture Atlas, and I thought it was really fantastic because they actually built a comprehensive multicultural knowledge acquisition framework. So they sourced a bunch of information on Wikipedia from 193 countries, 1,000 regions, and 2,500 ethnic groups, and they basically created this database that we can use. So then they use this data and they train their models, and they actually were testing it on Llama 2, Vicuna, and ChatGPT, and they're finding that the larger the models, they started to generally perform better, and they're showing more cultural alignment, which means that they're starting to understand cultural values a lot more. So this is a really nice way of having a framework to test it against. They still did find, though, that LLMs are still struggling with nuanced cultural information. So if you go in a really specific region of a country, the LLMs are still struggling. So still work to be done, but really fantastic to have a framework where you can test models against. And this paper is called Culture Park, and I thought it was a really fun approach. And here, they actually have a bunch of LLM agents that represent different cultures, and they start talking to each other. So they seed the conversations with questions from cultural surveys, and then these LLMs start engaging in multi-turn dialogues. And what we're doing here is we're creating, this is a scalable method of developing culturally diverse training data. So again, when they start training it using the Culture Park data, they're finding that the cultural alignment is far better on the GPT models. So another really fantastic approach. So there is promise, there is still hope. The last aspect I really want to talk about that Boone really cares about is also clarity. And by clarity, we don't mean simplicity. And when we present humans with AI models, it's so important that we're still engaging human critical thinking. Because humans and AI don't work together if suddenly the humans fallen asleep behind the wheel, like literally. So the problem is that humans tend to engage with AI-based decision aids in a heuristic and biased manner. So rather than carefully analyzing respective strengths and limitations of AI and themselves. So, we often put our brains on autopilot, especially if we're given lots of information at the same time. We're like, the AI, it knows it, it's fine. As humans, we have cognitive shortcuts. We're just hardwired to function in a certain way. And we need to be aware of that when we give people AI-based solutions. And simply adding explanations doesn't actually solve the over-reliance on AI issue. So we need to really think carefully about this. So this is something that actually is in the UX world. It's called strategic friction in UX. And normally when we create a user experience, we're trying to remove the friction, right? We're trying to make it as easy as possible. But turns out, when it comes to things that are really critical, making it a little bit more difficult is actually a good thing. So then we can transform quick reactions into well-considered decisions. So what friction does is it makes people stop and think for a second. And we found that it actually helps to increase accuracy in humans catching errors. So this paper talks about behavior descriptions. And you'll see in the green is the saying that this is an AI prediction, and that in itself should prompt somebody to think a little bit more. That doesn't work. However, the behavioral description, that's the thing in the orange, is telling you a little bit more about the model. So this AI is only 40% accurate for reviews like this with less than 50 words. So if you have a behavior description, it has to be actionable. So it tells a person when you should override the AI input. It has to be simple, so it can't be a very long paragraph on how the AI works and all. And significant. So you shouldn't use it all the time. You should use it when, oh no, I really need the person to actually engage our human critical thinking right now. And that seems to work quite well. I thought this paper was also interesting. So it's cognitive forcing functions. So they were testing again. You're showing results. You can click to also see the AI results. And they tried 3 different cognitive forcing functions. So one is on demand, so the user had to click on a button to see the AI suggestion. It could be an update, so users made an initial decision without the AI help, and then were shown that the AI suggests what the AI thinks, and they can decide whether to update it or not. And then there was another function where it just had a kind of loading button on the image and then showed the AI suggestion. And all these things, all they're doing, again, is that friction. And the possible explanation, again, is a system 1 versus system 2. If you haven't read the book, Thinking Slow, Thinking Fast, go out, buy it. It's very important with AI at the moment. And the thing is that it's disrupting his heuristic reasoning, which is a system 1 thinking, and it's causing people to engage in more system 2 thinking, which is what you really need when people are making critical decisions using AI. So, when we create AI models, we're really obsessed with making AI models more capable. I mean, they give us the best press, right? That's what we hear about all the time. But I really don't think it's enough. I think we have to really think about the larger context in which these AI models are operating in. And the other thing I think you really need to understand is how they integrate with us and our human cognitive processes. Because if we don't think about that larger context and how we use the AI, we're not going to create great AI. And this is the only way to create AI that truly benefits humanity. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chanuki, for a really beautiful talk. And you mentioned clarity. Those are some of the clearest slides I've ever seen. We have time for a question. So does anyone have one? I see one right up there. Yeah.
Thank you for such a nice talk. So my question was, what if our theories of psychology and how we process information, etc., are wrong? We implement these and actually we find out, say, with lobotomies 100 years ago, and actually, that wasn't such a good thing. How do we put the genie back into the bottle in that sense and correct that error?
Yeah, never rely on theories alone. It's just always test and always experiment. I think, and that's the thing, right? We don't know exactly the right answer. We don't know yet how to build AI systems that are going to be truly impactful, useful, safe. And the only way we're going to figure that out is through experimentation and research and testing. And I think that's the only way around it.
One more question? Yeah.
You talked a lot about making it culturally like sound and different languages, and I was wondering whether you take into account that it might be the case that not all cognitive processes or decision paths are the same. So, for example, whether we consider the personality dimensions that we use as a cultural value, or something that like it's universal for everyone. So like are these 5 dimensions universal? Like how do you control for that cultural equivalency, if it makes sense? So like one thing is to translate the cultural constructs into something that maps onto the English ones.
Yeah.
How do you control the when you're not doing that like by applying psychology that is westernized to non-Western countries?
I think that's a really, really good point. Yes, you're totally right that we do tend to use Western constructs. I think this is the beginning, is by trying to understand other cultures in a more nuanced ways. The other thing you have to do is, it's the same as domain knowledge. You need people on the ground from that country really helping you experiment, test, validate. I wouldn't like to make really serious decisions in another country without people in that country in the room. Because we always, even if we're trying our hardest, it's very hard to flip outside of ourselves, and to have that person that's on the ground that can kind of validate and question us, I think is really, really important. So I think it's a really good point.
If I can just like ask a further question, is how like do you think about talking to people that have not been educated in this system? So for example, I'm Italian, but I do think that sometimes I think like English people because of the way I've been like educated here, right? And you were saying the same about Sri Lanka, like how, you know.
So what we do at Boon is we're trying to understand why people do what they do. The why, you don't need to be a complete expert to just validate that bit. So you can say, we think, using our models, this is why people do what they do. And they could say, oh yeah, that makes sense, I understand that. Going, oh, wait a minute, I'm not really sure. And then we might dig into that and share the results and have a conversation. So it's not necessarily that you're going to find an expert, but it doesn't mean that we can't sit there and have a in-depth discussion and still validate the answers. Because this is how, with AI, just even with culture is the same. When you're building AI, you need domain knowledge, right? We have to constantly engage with either the domain knowledge or cultural knowledge, whatever it is, to build better AI models.
Thank you very much again, Chanuki.